Today we're going to show you a very quick how to configure iSCSI on Windows 2016. Now there's a couple of things I want to mention right off the bat. One, this is obviously not new technology, but it is very important to know, particularly if you are living in a DevOps world and you want to be able to provision storage quickly and easily. Number two, for your own benefits, please heed the warning which is attached right now. If you are going to configure this, please make sure that on a network point of view that you have spanning tree protocol disabled both on the client and on the target. Now we're going to start referring to the target as the initiator from here on, so just think of it as the initiator and the target. The initiator is the client and the target is the host that's providing. Now from that point on we'll get into the configuration. So first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to need to be able to run iSCSI on your host. So in this case we have a host that we're going to use for basically allocating disks to other machines over iSCSI. Now first of all we have a disk here, so we're going to use this to actually host our test disk. So first of all I need to make sure that's formatted and ready for use before we can proceed. So I'm just going to go ahead and format this so that we can use it for effectively allocating to our client machine that we'll get to in a little bit. So now I have a nice healthy drive that's formatted. I can proceed to use this. So the first thing I'm going to need to do is go ahead and open up a command prompt and install the necessary features in order to run iSCSI on this machine. So if I open up command prompt, and since I've got the UAC enabled, I'm going to go ahead and do that as administrator. Now I'm going to import the module server manager first of all, and once I've imported the server manager I'm going to use the add windows feature, and in this case the windows feature that we want to add is called fs-iSCSI target-server. So this is a bit of a mouthful at the best of times and certainly a lot to type out, so please bear with me. I'm typing as fast as I can. Now after that is done, we're going to go ahead and import the iSCSI and create some folders and other parts, but just for the moment we're going to go ahead and do the install in this section. Now since when I add this feature it's going to take a little while for Windows to go ahead and actually install that feature, we're going to use a little bit of time that we have available to explain why we might do this. So why would we use iSCSI? Well, one of the advantages is that we can configure it ourselves. We don't need to rely on SAN management or other high features that potentially require other plugins and other components or other network teams potentially. Two, because it's something that can be configured at the client level in terms of the connections, it's also kind of cool. You take as an example, you can have a very standard image with just the OS on, deployed, and then you can attach all of your data drives afterwards, which gives you a very flexible solution in a DevOps environment. And that in itself is probably one of the major benefits. Now you can see we've finished the install, so we're going to switch over now to the creating the disk stage. Creating the disk is probably very simple, all things considered, but there are a couple of parts to it. So first of all I need to create a folder to store my virtual disks in. Now the reason I'm going to create a folder for it is keep in mind that the file system will see these virtual disks on my host machine as files. So I had to first create a folder to put them in. I also need to now import the module of my freshly installed iSCSI target. So I need to install the iSCSI target module in order to start using the commands that are within that. So next I'm going to go ahead and create a new virtual disk and place it on the file system using the new iSCSI virtual disk commandlet. and I'm going to place that in the E drive so that we can be used. And keep in mind that there's something worth mentioning here. Earlier versions did use the VHD format, and now we're using the VHDX, which is the enhanced format. And I'm going to create a 10 gig disk. Now I'm going to create the file to match the iSCSI target name later. So I'm creating one called test vol, and later we'll use that as well when we're doing the association. So we have a disk now created, but it's not shared with anyone. So the file itself exists, but nothing else. So now we're going to go ahead and create a new iSCSI server target. Now what this is effectively the share, if you will. And from that point of view, you need this before the client can actually see anything. So we're going to create one, and the target name is test vol. Our initiators ID. Now this is the important thing. The initiators ID can be configured in a couple of different ways. You can use the initiators IQN, full name, etc. But we don't have resolution between these two hosts. So since there's no resolution between these two hosts, I'm going to go ahead and use just the IP configuration. So I'm going to grab the IP. Now also note that if you were filling in the initiators, apart from the IP and the IQN, you can also use MAC and a few other different differentiators. And if you have multiple ones, like you have a cluster and therefore you need to enter more than one, you can use a comma to separate the values. So you could in theory put IP address equals, then the IP, comma, then IP address equals, and then the next server, and so on and so forth. So you don't have to put just a single one. So we've now created our iSCSI server target, so that's the share. Now we have to create a relationship between the file we created earlier and this share. So this is where we go add SCSI virtual disk target mapping, and then target name, and enter the target name, in this case test vol, and then the path to the file that we created earlier, which is our eluns testvol.vhdx. As you can imagine, that's more than a little bit of a mouthful for this part of the course. Now, having done that, we will get again the nice little screen returning that this part is done. So once it's completely typed out, and that's it. No return, no information, no update, but we can go and quickly check on the file that we created. So the file is there. You can see it has a minimal size. It's only about 4 meg or so, and that's this part done. So now we have a operating host and we have all of our disks. We're going to go ahead now and connect the client. Now the client itself is even easier than the other parts. Now the client is separated into two parts. First of all, we need to get the service running. Second of all, we need to connect the iSCSI target. So first, let's get the services running. Now for this, again, pretty straightforward and simple. Open up a command prompt, or in this case, I'm going to go ahead and open up PowerShell. I'm opening it up as admin because again I have the UAC turned on. So we're going to reset the services first of all. So we're going to set service, and it's the MS iSCSI service. And we're going to change the startup type to automatic. So the service exists by default, there's nothing to install, but it's not set to automatic startup. So we're just going to change that so that we can have the service running from now on automatically, and during a reboot it gets reconnected, not just losing our drive. Next we're going to start the iSCSI service, so start the MS iSCSI, and once that's started we have two commands that we're going to run. So the first one is we're going to run the new iSCSI target portal. This is the one where we enter the target portal address, and the target portal address is our host address. So that's the server we were working on moments ago. So in this case, like I said, since there's no resolution between them, again, I'm going to work with the IP address for the moment. But you could theoretically use DNS names or other parts if this was on a domain, or if I had the resolution set up, or if there was a host file that pointed to. So it doesn't really matter which of those options exists in your network, just that they must be able to resolve between the two. Failing that, you can always use IP addresses like I am today. So now that we have that connection there to the portal, you can use that in order to add the additional connections. So in this case, we only have one disk, and that disk is mounted to our test vol. So if we use our test vol, we can effectively connect that disk. So as you can see, we just ran a very quick check to see whether we could see our target portal. As you can see, we get a response. So now we're going to go ahead and connect our iSCSI target, the node address, and this is where we can actually use our target portal to reply to us. So I can, in this case, encapsulate the get iSCSI target and node address so that I don't need to enter the IP. Then dash persistent equals, or in this case, space true, and then I have a connection. Now once that's entered, we should get a response. We can see that our iSCSI has responded. So I'm now going to pop over to the disk manager and see if the disk is presented as it should be. Now hopefully, with all that has been done so far, we should be able to see our new 10 gig disk. And yes, we can see it. We can see that it's not operational, so we need to bring it online, we need to initialize it, and we need to format it. So these are normal steps for any new disk within Windows. So nothing different that you would see from a SAN from that point of view. I'm going to go ahead and format it. And one of the things I'm going to quickly show before we finish this is that the disk, once it's formatted, it will no longer be that 4 meg that we saw earlier. So if I pop over to the host, even though we haven't put anything on it other than just formatting the disk, we'll now have more metadata, and we'll therefore have a larger disk. So just by having a formatted disk, we have that larger. Now that wraps it up for this video. Hopefully you found this enjoyable. If you did, give us a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down, and subscribe for more content.